Hello everyone, and in today's video we're going to talk about who was the real Richard Rich. Richard Rich is a very important Tudor historical character. He played a role under Henry VIII's reign, but also Edward VI and Mary I's reign, and even ended up playing a role as well in Elizabeth I's reign. So he basically survived 4 Tudor monarchs. And it's not very surprising that he did it, probably because he had no moral compass. He was very easy to move from one line to the other and to persecute anyone that the king or the queen asked for him to persecute. So, it's I think very important to realize the mindset of the man. And in the show War Fall, he's portrayed as one of the men who betrayed Cromwell and who was part of his jury. And what's very interesting as well is that obviously Cromwell made sure that Richard Rich rose to power at Henry VIII's court. So in many ways he played a big role in what Richard Rich ultimately became. But in today's video, we're not talking about the fiction. I'm not talking about how it's portrayed in the show. I think in the show is a bit I think we don't have a sense of how horrible he truly was. It's not at all depicted. We just see someone who betrays Cromwell, but still many others did. So it almost feels like, oh well. But we don't really understand who he was and his role in the dissolution of monasteries, what he did to Anne Askew with Thomas Cromwell, his role in the downfall of John Fisher, and his role in the downfall of many others, of Lambert, of Thomas More. And so it's just absolutely skimmed over. And even in the show, he looks like quite somehow a nice guy, and he really wasn't. So who was the real Richard Rich? Richard Rich, first Baron Rich, was born in July 1496, and he died on the 12th June 1567. He was Lord Chancellor during King Edward VI of England's reign from 1547 until January 1552. He was the founder of Felsted School with its associated almshouses in Essex in 1564. He was a beneficiary of the dissolution of monasteries, and what I mean by that is that he made his wealth and money thanks to the dissolution of the monasteries. And he persecuted opponents of the king and his policies. He played a very important role, as I said, in the trials of Thomas More, John Fisher, as well as the Protestant martyr Anne Askew. He has no moral compass, and he knows how to play. I would say that he's probably better than anyone else at playing the games of thrones, and how to always position himself as someone important in the government. Little is known of Richard Rich's early life. All we know is that he might have studied at Cambridge. By 1528, Rich was in search of a patron and wrote to Cardinal Wolsey. In 1529, Thomas Audley succeeded in helping him get elected as an MP for Colchester. As Audley's career advanced in the early 1530s, so did Rich's, through a variety of legal posts before he became truly prominent in the mid-1530s. He became a lawyer. He became closer and closer to Thomas Cromwell, and Thomas Cromwell took him under his wing. He was seen as someone less strong and less problematic than Cromwell. I would just say that he was probably more fake and very good at saying what people wanted to hear, but not really delivering anything. While on trial, Thomas More said that Rich was, and I quote, always reputed light of his tongue, a great dicer and gamester, and not of any commendable fame. Rich was someone that you could not trust, that if you ended up having a conversation with, he would ultimately try to betray you. If, obviously, it was part of his plan to climb the ladder at the court. As King's solicitor, Rich travelled to Kimberley Castle in January 1536 to take the inventory of the goods of Catherine of Aragon, and wrote to Henry asking how he might properly obtain her possessions. On 19th April 1536, Rich became the Chancellor of the Courts of Augmentations established for the disposal of the monastic revenues. His own share of the spoil acquired either by grant or purchase, included Liz Priory in Essex and about 100 manors in Essex. He became one of the most influential and wealthy men in Essex. He was the Speaker of the House of Commons in the same year and advocated the King's policy. And he just kept playing, like his faith was just a tool for him to do whatever. He was just following the King's policy. What we know from his own personal belongings is that he remained a devout Catholic all his life. Yet, he was very important under Edward's reign. Yet he had no problem persecuting Catholics, Thomas More, John Fisher. Yet he had just no problem doing exactly what he was told to do. Even under Elizabeth I's reign, he knew how to play the games of the court. He knew how to play the games of power. What's very also interesting is that Rich took part in the prosecution of Bishop Stephen Gardiner and Edmund Bonner and had a role in the harsh treatment accorded to the future Mary I of England. But upon her accession, Mary showed Rich no ill will. He took an active part in the restoration of the old religion in Essex under the new reign. I want you to understand that he persecuted Catholics under Henry VIII's reign, but he persecuted Protestants as well, like Anne Askew, and he just kept persecuting people. So under Edward's reign, he did everything to put the country back to Protestantism, in true, strong Protestantism. Not back, because obviously it had never really been, in many ways, Protestant. But when Mary became queen, he's like, okay, let's put everything back in Catholic. I want you to understand how opportunistic he really was, how he had no moral compass. He was just doing whatever it would take for him to be extremely successful and extremely wealthy. And when you really look at his life, he's really chasing the money. By the mid-16th century, Rich had the reputation for immorality, financial dishonesty, double dealing, perjury and treachery. And it's just crazy how he was disliked by a lot of people, but at the same time he was untouchable. Like nothing could happen. He had played his cards so well that yes, people knew that he had no moral compass, that they had to be careful around him. Yet there's no downfall like there was for Cromwell. And I find it, or even Thomas More, who definitely didn't deserve his tragic end. But it's just so crazy that a man with such a bad reputation over decades managed to thrive in many ways. An interesting fact about Richard Rich is that in 1546, he's one of the men, including Thomas Priestley, to go after Catherine Parr. He was on a witch hunt, he was trying, again, to please Henry VIII. But also, he had no remorse of trying to destroy anyone. And obviously, he was also one of the torturers of Anne Askew with Thomas Priestley. So you have this man who was a true Tudor villain. He was such a despicable human being. And he tried to bring down Catherine Parr in 1546. But obviously, she was going to outsmart him. She knew what kind of man she was married to. And I'm so glad that she did, because otherwise he would have had her. During the reign of Edward VI, Richard Rich made everyone believe that he was actually a staunch Protestant. Along with Archbishop Thomas Cromwell, who was actually a real Protestant. He's never really tried to disguise it. He was of the men who pushed the Henrician Reformation. He ensured the destruction of all images and idols in the realm's churches. Throughout the realm, great roots and stained glass were destroyed. He was involved in proceedings leading to the arrest and imprisonment of conservative and later avowed Roman Catholics. And he turned his back, obviously, on Bishop Stephen Gardiner, someone he had, made an alliance to bring down Thomas Cromwell. Here, what I want you to understand, because we have it through the lens of his life, is that many people, Richard Rich being like maybe the ultimate one, had no problem saying whatever people wanted to hear. Oh yes, I'm a Catholic. Oh yes, I'm a Protestant. Oh yes, I'm whatever you want, as long as you give me the money, right? And so I want you to understand that when we think about the early modern period, when you think about the Tudor period, we always think about, oh my God, it must have been very hard for the people between the different religions. And yes, it's true for the real people, for the ones who are not involved in politics. It must have been extremely confusing and very hard to actually accept a religious change. But for the people at court who had political agendas, religion just became a tool, just became a way of acquiring more power, acquiring more wealth. And Richard Rich, in many ways, embodies that feeling that it's not a question of religion, because under Edward VI's reign, he says he's a Protestant, but we know that in his writing, we know that he remained all his life a Catholic, but he had no problem persecuting anyone as long as he would climb the ladder of power at court. Richard Rich is probably the ultimate villain in Tudor England. I really hope that you enjoyed that video. Let me know in the comments what you knew about Richard Rich before and if this was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!